And then what does body autonomy mean? Even as a parent, if your child says, don't touch me, you respect that boundary. You teach them to be able to enforce a boundary for themselves. Teach them that once they're of age and they can clean themselves, you teach them how to do it. You can supervise, but you allow them to learn that this is mine. Nobody else is allowed to touch me unless I give consent.
I want to jump in there. It's interesting. I was reading some information. It turns out that some parents actually believe, a good number, that teachers in schools are the ones who are supposed to introduce children to this type of information, this sexual health, reproduction information. Is that true?
It's true if you don't know any better. Because remember who the parents are. So if your first contact was in school, then you will still believe that it should be the same now. But again, you also are in a position to know that what you were taught in school. I don't know about you guys. Me, the scary videos I was shown in the name of sexual health as a kid in school. I'm still traumatized. And the HIV, there was a whole campaign. And body parts and disease, it was just crazy. But if that's all I remember of sexual health, why would I imagine or allow my children to be exposed to the same thing? Imagine that the same narrative is not what is still being taught now. Or if you're still shy, if you don't feel empowered, if you don't feel like you have enough information yourself, then go to the school and interrogate what exactly are you teaching the kids. Are you teaching the kids anything to begin with? And I think those are the shortcomings we still have. Those are the gaps we still have.
Do you think the average adult knows more about their own body and sexual reproductive health? Not even kids, just the average Kenyan adult, because you're obviously in this space, you own your own clinic. When you engage with them, do you feel like Kenya they're kind of ignorant?
We're teaching a lot of women in their 40s, 50s, what normal feels like or looks like, what sexual pleasure is. That's the conversation. This is where we're starting the conversation, because again, nobody taught you before. You didn't have any experience. Unfortunately, a lot of people's first contact is negative. So it was an abuse situation or someone did something that they were not consenting to. So then that informs the rest of their sexual history. So when we have conversations in clinic, and don't forget the influence of the church. So if the teaching is touching yourself is a sin, how else will you learn what your normal looks and feels like? So those are the things we're trying to teach people a bit now, because just as adults we're struggling. So how are we going to then teach our kids?
As a professional in this field, do you think there is adequate information out there for adults, for example? They need to now approach people like you, experts, to get this information. And who's supposed to provide this information? I guess, is it government?
Right. There's a lot more information than we used to have. A lot of us are using the internet to help people access information very easily. There's a lot of now health providers, doctors, nurses, different health cadres who are teaching accurate health information, because again, there's misinformation. And because we have seen a lot of information, we've taken like a stance and said, you know what, it means putting myself out there more than I'm comfortable doing, but I have to take that stand and say, listen, at least if you come to my pages, or if you come to a certain websites, if you come to podcasts, because that's what I do now, you'll be able to get information on the different topics that you're trying to understand. And we are sort of trying. And it's different types of specialists, not just obstetricians, gynaes. Pediatricians have also taken the mantle, where we have someone like Dr. Rain, I think people know him off of socials, who takes an extra step to educate and inform around children's health as well, so that then you have access. There's pages you can go to, there's people you can look for. You can Google and find me and find out where to see me if you must come and have a conversation. But at least you have some bits of accurate information out there.
The way you're talking about people going to the internet to learn about all these things when it comes to sexual health, how are you normalizing people, especially women, coming to gynecologists, and not when it's last minute after you've tried all the over-the-counter meds because you're having funny things going on?
Standard is most people will Google first and then go to their local pharmacy and pick up something over the counter, and then at the point where nothing is working is when they come in to see us. So in recent times, what we've tried to do is put out the information so that the main challenge is stigma and shame. So it's not that I don't know I should see a doctor, it's I'm afraid of the judgment that will come with the symptoms I'm having, especially when it comes to sexual reproductive health. So because I know I have a weird discharge or I have a new lesion somewhere, I don't want the healthcare provider to know about it. I'll be embarrassed about it. But what we're doing is encouraging people, especially with all the awareness days we have for the different medical conditions, we kind of normalize coming in for a checkup and insisting that you just, like your car, you're going to take your car for service. Once a year you should come in and we check your body. This is your house. Come and make sure everything is functioning, and that information is a lot more available a lot easier now.
So are you finding it, because I know there's male gynecologists and there's women, so are you finding it that more people are going towards the women, or
there's been a shift? Before, when I was training, everyone asked who would come to you. That's what the question was. But then over time I feel like women are now shifting more to female gynecologists, just because there's a bit more rapport, there's a bit more understanding, there's less likelihood of shaming. It's not 100%, but there's less likelihood. Plus just being comfortable, and also there's the fact that you keep hearing horror stories out there. So
we've had a lot of them.
Am I the only one who just feels like women should be the gynecologists? And
Me too. I'm very uncomfortable with male gynecologists, especially now for some of us who have like wives and girlfirls. And then they say they're going to the gyna, and then
I'm coming with
buff dude over there.
You're just next to you. Like, I know. Women only. You just say like, we're in the room.
I mean, I've heard this stereotype that men are the best gynecologists. Is that true, or what does this really mean?
I think it just depends on what you're comfortable with, because there are women, especially when I was growing up, the mindset was he's less likely to judge me, he's less likely to compare himself with me. There's this woman against woman type of narrative. So women were more comfortable with men, and there still are those who will say I'm just more comfortable with a male gynecologist, and there's nothing wrong with it, because again, with training, we're trained the same, the specialization is the same, and we know to consult in case you get stranded, because you don't necessarily have to have lived through a condition to understand what's happening with that person's body. But then, and it's the same for any other specialty, because you can't nitpick and say only men should operate on the brain. It becomes imbalanced a bit. But then now women also culturally, some cultures, some traditions don't allow for it. So there are more women gynecologists. So you do have options. Whatever you're more comfortable with, we will not pass judgment at that level, surely. Whoever you're more comfortable with, whoever you feel like you have more of a rapport. A lot of people also transition their doctor from childhood. So you'll find like now family medicine practitioners who are sort of like a specialized GP. So you'll have started with your pediatrician, transition to your family health doctor, and then that's who looks after you throughout. And if it's male, it just continues the same. So we still don't have a point where everyone has direct access to a specialist. So whoever they have access to, we encourage that you go in.
Okay, so there are people who are listening in who are not sure what an obstetrician is. They don't know what a gynecologist is. Like, would you break it down in layman terms?
Okay, so an obstetrician gynecologist is a women's, let me just say, reproductive health specialist. So not necessarily just women, but that's who we primarily look after. The difference between the two, it's Latin. Obstetrician is when I look after you in pregnancy, focused on from the point where you conceive to the point where we deliver and postpartum, I'm your obstetrician. When I'm looking after you outside of pregnancy and it's your general reproductive health, sexual health, then I'm your gynecologist. In Kenya, we train to be both. There are some countries where you choose one versus the other. So you'll go somewhere and see just this person is only a gynecologist and this other one is an obstetrician. But in Kenya, we train for both. And then under that big umbrella, we have now subspecialties that look at things like fertility, maternal health, gynae oncology, where we're looking after cancers to do with the reproductive system. So it's broken down further into subspecialties, but the general training in Kenya is both obstetrician and gynecologist. So you get 2 degrees in one.
What is the connection between gender-based violence and sexual reproductive health?
Lack of knowledge, lack of information. That's the big link. Because if I understand, let's give a good example where a lady can present with an abnormal vaginal discharge, and it's simply just a yeast infection, which is because of change of hormones or climate or exposure to, she's had antibiotics, whatever. But if your partner doesn't understand that, it's an STI.
Wow.
100%.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately some people don't regulate themselves, so now this becomes I will hit you until you tell me who else you're sleeping with.
Yes.
So that's the link. It's literally lack of information. She doesn't know any better either, because she's too afraid to come in and learn. And even when she comes in, we literally have to teach you, okay, listen, a UTI is not an STI. That's urinary tract infection, not an STI. A yeast infection, not an STI. And even if you do have an STI, why are we blaming the female? That's what we end up having to manage.
I kind of feel like some women also do not really disclose the right information to their partners, especially when they're going through some of these, issues. I don't know, I may be wrong, but she may be going through something, but she's not going to tell you exactly what it is, just because she knows probably you would react. Like you said, I think that's how the connection is to gender-based violence. But how can women isn't it not important? Do you advise the women to always be open to their spouses, maybe boyfriends and husbands, in that case?
You
discover something.
We encourage for both ways, but we also advocate for safety, because you know your partner. And unfortunately, a lot of the dynamics we see are already preset in a setting where there's a lot of violence in the relationship or abuse in the relationship. So I'm not going to insist that you take yourself home and announce that you have abnormal discharge if your partner is not receptive to that information. Instead, what I'll say is bring them in. Let me be the one to guide the conversation.
Also, they should tag along when they're coming to, when they're going to see a guy now.
Because a lot of men don't want to come in, or they'll come all the way to reception and sit there, pack themselves with the paper, and we're like, okay, go do your business. But you should come in, have a conversation, understand why she's here, what exactly we're doing. It'll also help you create a rapport with the doctor, so that you're more comfortable when she comes in for her appointments.
Now, I know cervical cancer is a big thing that's coming up, especially with people unaware of how to detect it. So what are some of the tips that you give people out there that they should be aware of, so they can come in for a checkup?
So the advantage with cervical cancer that we have now is advancement in medicine, where we have a vaccine that actually helps protect you. The primary link in terms of risk factors is HPV virus, which is human papilloma virus, which is a sexually transmitted infection. And now we have been able to study it enough, because viruses mutate. So we have the versions that are low risk and those that are high risk, and we've been able to study them and actually develop a vaccine against the high risk forms. And the high risk ones are linked with cervical cancer, the low risk ones are linked more with genital warts. So the first step, if you have a daughter age 8 and above, the best point of contact, I'd say not even just a daughter, because the daughter is primarily the government-led drive is targeted towards the girls, but it should be both, because again, it's an STI. It affects men as well, it affects boys, and in men it causes penile cancer, mouth throat cancers, so there's and genital warts as well. So there is a benefit to both genders. So what we would advocate for is, first of all, vaccinate your kids before point of sexual contact, and that's getting younger and younger. So parents out there, stop acting.
I know, man.
Like your kids are not sexually active.
You think as young as what? At as young as 8?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. This is
when I was in Kisumu, and I think I was telling you this cave, I was selling stuff or something, and my sister took me to one of these, events, and it was being run by Mary Stops, and there was a 13-year-old girl who came in to get family planning.
13?
Yeah.
That's sad.
Yeah.
And I was very shocked.
Yeah.
Andy Pieri.
Okay.
Yes. 13. So when you tell me 8, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah. And also remember, a lot of first contact is abuse in the family.
I can imagine.
Yes.
Within.
So, yes.
You guys.
So,
what?
Yeah. So by the time you're thinking your kids are not yet active, somebody is taking advantage of that child. So you need to try your best to protect them as much as possible. So the first step would be vaccination. And then once vaccinated, and Scotland recently declared themselves cervical cancer free, because they've been steadily vaccinating for a few generations now. So it's actually proving to be beneficial. Then for those who missed the vaccine or haven't had access or don't really want to get, because again, anti-vaxxers, then the next thing is screening. And screening is coming in at least once a year to have your pap smear done, and that's the very basics. But if you can afford it, we can add on the HPV DNA testing. So we're actually looking to see if you have HPV, and if you don't, then it helps with increasing the timelines between when you can have your pap smear. So instead of every year, you'd have it every 3 years if you're co-testing. So the key thing is screening, because if you're not able to vaccinate, the beauty or advantage of cervical cancer is that it is curable before we get to cancer.
Right.
By the time you get a HPV infection, all the way to the time where the cells become abnormal, it's usually 10 to 15 years. So if you're screening regularly, we will find those cells as they start to become abnormal, and we can do procedures to take them out and take you back to normal. So it's actually considered a preventable cancer. Yeah.
When it comes to policies, obviously Kenyans have rights when it comes to obviously the sexual and reproductive health as per the constitution. But do you think these policies are progressive?
You've gone political on me.
She needs a slip of
Drinks.
water.
Yeah,
Go in.
take a sip.
Interesting.
Yeah, you know they say we're progressive as a country. Yeah, so these policies that are out there, are there loopholes? Or are they legit? They're progressive.
We are very, very good at developing policies. Do we enact them? Do we put them into practice? We have beautiful policies. We have a fantastic sexual reproductive health bill, which has never been passed because abortion. That's the only thing everybody focused on. And yet it covered everything all the way through to assisted reproduction like IVF. There were going to be very clear guidelines, even in surrogacy and the likes. But again, politics, religion, there's always a stopgap there, and it stops us from actually being progressive.
Right.
So it's all well and good to sit in a conference and come up with a beautiful document, but are we actually putting
Implementing it?
into practice?
It's interesting you mentioned politics, religion, but there's also culture.
Yes,
The cultural context when it comes to this conversation of sexual and reproductive health. How is it now within the communities? Are people open to learning about their own sexual and reproductive health?
Yeah.
There's a bit of more barriers that we need to overcome.
You would think culture was a hindrance, but it never was, even historically. If you go back to your origins, whatever your tribal background is, there was always a setup where the girls were put aside and the boys were put aside, and they were taught about becoming an adult. You were taught about the changes that are coming with puberty, how to be responsible, how to make sure you're preventing pregnancy. All of that was cultural. Even now, when you talk to people on a day-to-day, people are talking about sex. They're talking about their sex lives. They're talking about their exposure. They're talking about their relationships. So I don't think we have a culture issue. Okay. I think it's when we start to tell people how to live or start to dictate how they should express themselves, that's where we start to see the problems.
What are some of the questions you get from people curious about, sexual health and reproductive that have never had an experience to actually speak to you, especially with the youth, the Gen Zs?
Gen Zs teach me a lot.
What do you mean?
You probably learn new terms every other week.
I'm always learning something new because they are more globally connected than any other, generation, because they have information from their peers in the first world where sex education is standard, it's normal. So they actually have quite a bit of information. The problem is what's accurate and what's not, what's misinformation and what's not. So just helping them understand what exactly is right and what they should put aside and shouldn't be following. Teaching them how to be discerning of information on the internet. Usually that's the first challenge we face because, and I encourage my patients when they come in, bring your Google files, bring everything you've read so that I can,
we can
debunk
verify
a few
this
things.
information.
Because everybody starts with Dr. Google. Instead of acting like that's not the truth, we start to break it down, help you go through it. And it's for everyone. Even in pregnancy, first-time moms will come with, a folder this thick. Daktari, is this vaccine okay? Or is this food okay? Or did I walk right? Or did I sit right?
And I think the rate of self-medication through that has become extreme. Nowadays, it's just Google and then go to the chemist.
Exactly, which can be quite dangerous. True. Because that's how we have super gonorrhea, for example.
I don't know if I'm supposed to ask this, but What are some of the common, common issues you face, like on a day-to-day, and this is rampant right now, like on the patients that you're treating? I know there's patient disclosure, so you're not supposed to mention any patient, but like what you're really witnessing happening, what is this trend? What are these diseases that are really now rampant, especially when it comes to sexual health? Yeah, and even just STIs and
common. Just STIs are very common. Nairobi has become that cesspit.
How would you rate it?
Oh, it's bad.
Really?
It's pretty bad. Because from the conversations I have with colleagues, I mean, chlamydia and gonorrhea are standard operating procedure.
It's the norm now.
Yeah.
What?
So it becomes, Gen Z or the younger generation are more afraid of pregnancy than they are of HIV or any other STI. So that's where we're at now. And having to navigate the long-term effects, because again, if issues like this are not treated, they have very long-term serious implications, including fertility later on. So we do have, it's like liberation without information. That's the best way I'd explain it. So people who are very, very forward-thinking and they feel, I can do whatever I want to do, I can make my own decisions, I'm empowered, but you don't have the right information, that's a very dangerous person. So STIs are quite
so they're more rampant among the Gen Zs than...
No, because again, we are very notorious with intergenerational relationships. Older dating very
younger ones.
Yeah.
So it's
across the board. It's across the board.
That's dangerous, man.
That's ridiculous.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, guys, hold it right there. If you're just joining us, we are with the one and only Dr.Claire Kinuthia. She's a consultant. That word.
OBGYN.
There you go. And also a gynecologist, Maze. It's all about empowering youth to make informed sexual and reproductive health decisions. Steph.
Yeah. Is there a growing number of abortions happening in Kenya? Especially with now, as you said, the younger generation being more scared of being pregnant than STDs.
I don't know that it's a growing number. I think people are having more conversations around the topic, around the issue. It's not that there's more. There's always been terminations, whatever age group you look at, whatever timeline you look at. There's always been the option for safe termination in this country, but we were always, you don't talk about it, you don't have these conversations. Also, access was also a bit limited, but now people are sharing information. There's much more easily accessible, safe options, because we've always had terminations, but we primarily had unsafe terminations because of access, whether it's information, knowing who to ask, being able to ask, going to the right place, going to a provider who's actually safe. Those are the challenges that we face, but I don't think we have a sudden increase in numbers or anything like that.
Let's talk about the big C word, contraceptives, especially amongst younger Kenyans. These days, Kwanzaa, I was watching something so crazy where a dad was having a conversation with his wife about, them giving their daughter contraceptives and that kind of thing. So he was like, let's push abstinence. We need to preach more of abstinence when it comes to our children. The wife was like, nah, that ship sailed. Yeah. So how do you approach this as a parent? Because I'm sure it's a very scary conversation to even think that your kid could be sexually active out there. You know, should we just keep on preaching abstinence for Kenyans? I'm the C word.
I'd say if you're not comfortable having the conversation, that's why we are here. The gynecologists, the doctors, come in with your daughter, son, and let's have a conversation together so we can navigate your fears versus what they're up to. If you're still not comfortable, again, empower them to make the decisions. So if you're just preaching abstinence, what you're doing is leaving a gap where they don't have the right information and they don't have access to the right contraceptives if they need them. So then we end up with emergency or unplanned pregnancies. So you need to think about it holistically. It's not just, I'm going to try and stop my child from having sex. You'll never know when they start. If you are not someone they can talk to, you will never find out. They will keep it under wraps. You'll never hear about it. True. But they're being unsafe wherever they are. So you're better off empowering them with enough information to make an informed decision. And that's what this conversation is about. Like, literally empower this person, because they will become an adult soon. The thing we're forgetting, you want them to be a functional adult in society. So empower them with the information. And a lot of them will tell you, listen, I'm not ready. I'm actually not ready. The things you're talking to me about, I'm focusing on school. But because they have the information, they know when I am ready, this is who I can go to, and I'll get myself on a contraceptive if I need to. And then, because again, the narrative has always been girls are supposed to abstain, and I'm saying it the way it is on the ground, but boys are supposed to hunt and chase every girl possible.
Yeah.
Who's abstaining? So you're busy there chasing.
Right.
So it's crazy.
Right?
Yeah.
But then remember, it takes two to tango. So at the end of the day, the responsibility still falls on the shoulders of the girl, because she's going to be the pregnant one who's abandoned by everyone, by including the church who is preaching abstinence. They'll kick her out.
Yeah.
So you're better off keeping her informed in a way that if she feels she's ready to have sex and she's not ready to be a mother, because that's a true real dynamic, then let her protect herself. And if it starts with the parents, this is going to go such a much longer, further way, and you as a parent, now you're reassured that my child is actually safe.
I don't think if I would ever be a parent, I'd ever reach that point where I'm saying
that conversation.
Now I think you're safe. So,
You can imagine you have to.
I don't think I can be able to.
I'm not saying,
suggest
I'm
that
not
kind
saying
of thing.
have that conversation with them. Tell them at some point, this is what is going to
father to
happen.
daughter.
It is what it is.
At some point, I need you to know that if you're going to have interactions with boys, you're keeping it simple. Again, you should focus on age-appropriate sex education. It's not bombard them, honestly.
not with too
5-year-old, there's just too
You have
much.
to know the
You
levels
actually
of
know
communication.
the level of understanding. Ask questions, let them lead. Sometimes they'll ask you questions. Instead of freezing, be ready for that question. And then approach it the best you can, but then always redirecting to these options. If something happens, you don't feel comfortable talking to me, tell me, I'll take you to see the doctor.
I don't want to before we step off the contraceptive topic that Kev brought up. Is there a way that we Kenyans can know? I know there's been a lot of anti-pregnancy pills being bought. I think it's just become like the norm.
Oh, right, the emergency pill.
Yeah, the emergency pills and all. Is there any data to show how much is being consumed in Kenya? Because I feel like it's crazy. Is there a way that it's monitored just so we can understand? Because Steph was saying there are less abortions. So it's probably, when she asked, it was not really many abortions being done or not. So maybe are the young people just deep into the contraceptives?
Emergency contraceptives.
Yeah, emergency.
There's a lot of abuse of emergency contraceptives, and like I said, the propagators tend to be, it's very intergenerational, where the partner is older and he actually provides an emergency pill after, so that take care of this, make sure you sort yourself out, which I think is very dangerous. So the messaging to the younger people, or to whoever is sexually active, if you need to take emergency contraceptives twice in a year, you should be on a long-term contraceptive option. So come in and have a conversation, because they do have lasting effects long-term. In terms of when you're ready to actually have children, you've messed with your hormones so much, we'll be struggling a bit more.
So in Nairobi, we have access to a lot of information, access to a lot of facilities that offer this. But we do have listeners who are in areas that don't have access to this. So is there any projects that the government is doing in order to increase the amount of reach of resources out there, or are there projects coming up, or is there something that you can tell our listeners out there who are thinking, okay, I don't have a gynecologist in my area, what do I do?
We have a lot of NGOs available who are providing adolescent-friendly services or youth-friendly services, as well as contraceptives and the likes. And this is all over the country, not just in the major cities. So maybe reach out there. We used to have very strong youth-friendly services in government facilities. You keep taking me to the politics, but we know how
politics
healthcare
is
is right
days.
now.
These conversations have to be normalized.
Yeah, because it has directly affected the quality of care and the quality of services we're actually able to provide in those facilities. So we don't have the resources we had before, so that then whenever you went to a government facility, you could guaranteed have free contraception, guaranteed. That has since changed. So it's very difficult to answer the question currently, but we do have a lot of NGOs on the ground who are doing a lot of hard work, smaller organizations who are doing a lot of work to sort of fill in the gaps.
You've got a podcast. Now, for those that don't know, maybe you can tell us the name of your podcast.
Right. My podcast, the name is Circling the Rabbit Hole. And the reason I chose the name is because we all know that a deep dive, whatever happens to you when you go on the internet, is literally going down the rabbit hole. That's the saying. So what I aim to do with the podcast is to talk about sexual reproductive health topics to help you start to the deep dive. I want you to learn more. I want you to get curious and stop feeling so much shame or feeling like someone will judge you because you're looking this information up. So what we try to do is, and usually I do this by having guests on who talk about their own experiences versus the normal thing where the doctor tells you what to do. I wanted to step away from that so that we can talk about lived experiences. That's something that you can relate to and understand how this person navigated it, and then we interject with the correct way things should have been done if something happened.
I like that. It always goes back to stories.
Yeah.
I am so passionate about authentic Kenyan stories.
Yeah.
Let's document these stories.
True.
Especially for kids and the kids like that.
True.
What's the biggest, in terms of knowledge, what are Kenyans, because you mentioned curious, what are they mostly curious about when they engage with your content? What are some of the common questions that they ask you,
It's mostly, a lot of the times it's very specific to different conditions. So because like now, especially when we have awareness months now, we just had the breast cancer one. Most people will then ask questions around that topic. I see a lot more being asked about things like endometriosis because a lot of women are starting to understand period pain is not normal. And so if there's an issue, they're curious, do I have endometriosis or is there any other medical condition? If your hormones are all over the place, is this PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome? So people tend to ask very specific to what they're going through kind of questions. If I have abnormal discharge, should I be worried? So it tends to be varied, but the baseline, especially with where we started the podcast, we started with basic conversations with parents about how they navigated their own sex ed versus what they're doing with their kids. And there was a lot of fantastic feedback off of those episodes because everyone is like, oh wow, so and so such and such, because it tended to be, how you start a podcast with all the celebrities so that everyone can watch.
I feel you, girl.
Yeah. So it tended to be people they could resonate with and they could relate to, and they're like, oh my god, this famous person actually is also struggling to talk to their kids about sex. So I'm not abnormal. So then where do we start? And the best feedback I think I've had since I started was a mother who came back to me and said, I used your podcast to start conversations with my children. And I think that's the best thing. For me, that's
very good.
Job done.
That's
Is
very
there
good.
a story that you've been told in your podcast where you're thinking, oh my gosh, if you came to me earlier, this problem would not be there? That you've also seen as a trend outside there with people?
And again, it's just generally anything sex ed, anything to do with your body, because the baseline kicks in. What is normal? What is normal to do with sex specifically? How should I be having sex? How much sex is normal? How often, me and my partner, should we be engaging? If my partner likes this and I don't, is that okay? Or if this is should it be painful? Those are the kind of questions that keep coming up because people are very curious around their sexual wellness, but don't actually have places they know they can ask these questions.
JP, have you got a question?
I think I'm done for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not like in court.
I rest my case.
What's your biggest achievement ever since you got into this space of sexual and reproductive health education, or just generally?
Getting feedback that people are watching and listening and learning, because that I think has been the most common, most intense feedback for me, because when you're like, even with you guys here, you feel like you're talking to yourself.
Man.
Literally, I'll set up and have my guest on, and then you send the episode out there and you don't know how well it will be received or if we're going to have any pushback. Sometimes it gets controversial because we touch on things now proper taboo as far as Kenyans like to pretend.
I agree.
But we do get really positive feedback that you're teaching us so much, I'm learning so much. Because of you, I knew to go in to see my doctor. Because of you, I knew that we've been sitting on this as a couple for too long. It's time to talk to a therapist or something to help with, because again, there's always the link between mental health and sexual reproductive health. So a lot of people have given feedback that I've been struggling, and because of changing my libido or my inability to conceive or something between me and my partner, and because of you and helping me feel like I'm not alone, I'm not an alien, this is not abnormal, then I was able to go in and we went in together and we were able to talk to a specialist or someone who has guided us through that
You're
challenge.
adding so much value to
Absolutely.
our society, man. Can you just imagine how the era our parents grew up in with no information?
No
Just silence.
Our grandparents, it must have been daunting.
Yeah.
How often do you upload your content?
Every 2 weeks. So
Okay.
episodes go up every 2 weeks. Again, Kenyans are watchers rather than listeners, so YouTube tends to be where everyone is watching on YouTube primarily. So we do have video aspect to the podcast, but then it's available on AfriPods, Spotify, all the other audio platforms as well.
Talk that talk, girl.
So it sounds like sex ed seems to be a big problem. So do you think that universities or at least schools with like Form 3, Form 4 should start implementing that into their system now to actually teach the students about the correct sex ed?
Yeah, I think we should. We have universities that have. So like Kenyatta University, I've actually hosted their mentors, their peer, I can't remember what they call them, but they have peer mentors where they get training amongst themselves. So they're trained by specialists, by doctors, by therapists to have conversations with their classmates, with their age mates. And if you need contraception, they guide you to the right place. If you need emergency care for an unintended pregnancy, you're guided to the right place. If you need just a clinic visit, you need a checkup, they actually have fantastic support systems, and they teach them because they understood the gap. They understood that we're receiving a population of kids from all over the country who have not had any sex ed, and we are a university.
Yeah.
And that's where
You know, it just it got me thinking when you were talking about how some of these universities receive students from all over. It's almost as if it's only Kenyans from urban settings that have the privilege of engaging with this type of information, you know?
Yeah.
So, as an individual, before we even talk about GAVA, in fact, I don't want to talk about GAVA anymore. What are you doing to reach out to those Kenyans who would really benefit, especially young girls, from this type of information outside Nairobi?
So outreach programs are the primary way most organizations are reaching out, because then you bring the service to them. Because a lot of places, there's no place to go, like you said before, that there's no actual functioning health facility.
Exactly.
So you actually have to start to either the health facilities themselves, or like I said, NGOs will organize medical camps, so to speak, where they go out and the primary goal is to talk about sexual reproductive health, and they provide services discreetly, because again, there's also the economic side to unplanned pregnancy and in the family dynamic, where you just don't have control over how many babies you have in a situation where you don't really have resources. So then they're able to provide these services on the ground. So we have a lot more than we think is happening. So we're not as badly off as we used to be. It's just really remote Kenya is where we still struggle quite a bit.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like there's not enough also being done for the men. You know, there's a lot on, women, the gynecology and all, but men are also suffering and really hiding from many issues. And I feel like it's also breaking up many marriages and, partnerships in that matter. Issues like premature ejaculation, low libido, erectile dysfunction. Nobody ever talks to, addresses men about it.
Yeah.
Don't you guys think it's about time that you also curate, programs and also facilities where men can just go and find out more about their sexual health just for men?
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is, first of all, just start having open conversations with men, because the challenge is not just that they have issues and they don't know where to go. It's they have issues and they don't want to acknowledge,
For real.
So it's
deal
them.
with, talk about. They don't want anyone to know, forget even the providers. So it's trying to help them understand that it's better to come in for your regular checkups. Let's not wait until there's an actual issue, because a lot of these limitations tend to be because of other health issues. So diabetes, hypertension will directly affect libido and erectile dysfunction directly. So we want to help you before you get to that stage. So regular checkups, being more open amongst men, because again, there are more forums for women because women talk. It's harder for men to listen, and this is from my experience. Men don't listen to women, even as a doctor.
No, I feel you. No, I mean, even as a doctor.
Yeah, even as a doctor.
He'd rather listen to a male doctor.
Exactly. So it becomes a bit difficult to navigate on how I can then add value to the men. I've tried, because then I'm having more men on the podcast as well to talk amongst themselves. They tend to forget I'm in the room. Talk amongst yourselves to your people. And then I'm sitting there who's hosting this?
They've taken over the show. But then let me ask you. Okay, it's so well. Okay.
No, I wanted to jump onto that. Can a guy come to you as a gynecologist for
We tend to be the first point of contact, and then depending on what the issue is, we can direct them to like a urologist or another different type of specialist, depending on the issue. It's either they come to a gynecologist or they'll go to a general practitioner or a family medicine doctor. So it just depends on where they land. A lot of times their primary is the physician, because they know to go for their work requires they go for an annual checkup. So they go for that with their physician, cardiologist, whoever, and that's who will direct them where to go.
Right.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, I said I wasn't going to talk about government, but I feel like I'm talking about the state now. There's a difference between the state and government. But, as part of our Vision 2030, I don't know whether we're still on track to achieve some of our goals. But I'm just reading over here, the country is very committed, to, of course, give Kenyans the highest standard of health by 2030 through elimination of preventable maternal and newborn mortality, mother-to-child transmission of HIV, teenage pregnancies, new adolescents, and youth infections of HIV, and many other, priorities and targets that they have. Are we on the right track? Are we, especially 2030 is just right around the corner. All these things that we're talking about eliminating, do you foresee them happening, or we have a long way to go?
We used to be on track, but just with what's happened with SHIF, NHIF, it's taken us so far back, because now we're actually losing people in this confused middle ground where there's no access to the funds. So you had people who were already on chemotherapy, dialysis, they're on long-term management for chronic illnesses, suddenly don't have access because there's no translation between NHIF and SHIF. And I think and I'm just going to speak my mind here. I think it is a very reckless decision to make, because now we are messing with human life, because there's nowhere in the world where you transition from a system that's working to a new one without a period of trial. You don't just switch something off. So I think it's been quite reckless how we've handled it, and we're going to start to see we've already started to see the downside. We're losing a lot of people. Again, this is not something that's talked about outside, but us in healthcare, we see the direct effects. If you don't have cash to pay for the service, you're not getting the service. And that's where we are right now. So in the meantime, we need emergencies, service provision. People need to start to answer the question, what's happening on the ground, as opposed to saying, oh no, we're working on it. Oh no, yes, you'll be reimbursed. No, right now people are dying. What exactly should we be doing? But then long term, where we've seen gaps in vaccines for the first time, we were not able to access them again in the last 2 years or so. Same with contraception. Has always been accessible, has always been steady. Even if you didn't have it in private practice, you knew it was in government, so you were able, we always had access through the government systems. Again, we suddenly stop. So then where are you leaving the people who don't have the means to come to private facilities? What happens to them? So I think we're seeing a lot of damage, and we're going to see it for a while, and I don't know how we will correct for it. I don't like to think negatively too much, but we are in crisis. That's the reality.
Yeah, that's real talk. It's interesting you mentioned that, because somebody was telling me the other day that you should never fall sick in this country. It's the worst place to be in. And I just empathize with Kenyans who, of course, can't afford healthcare. And now, by the way, most Kenyans who are in that category, especially in the ones in the informal settlements, in the villages, they've resorted to herbal medicine. As we wrap up, before you jump in stuff, what would you tell Kenyans who feel like herbal medicine is a legit alternative because they can't afford healthcare in itself? So I wonder to some of the traditionalists, the herbalists, they say it's been working for centuries. That's what they've been using anyway. What would you tell Kenyans like those?
It's difficult to answer as a scientist, because for us in medicine, we have to have evidence before we prescribe or ask you to do even a treatment regime, forget actual medication. So if I don't know what is in the preparation you're taking, it's difficult for me to say it's going to work or not work. we do have, even historically, plants is where medicine came from, right? So if your source is a plant, you plucked the plant and you know how to prepare, that's different than if I give you a bottle of green fluid and say, there you go, you'll be healed. That's where I draw the line, because we are also commercializing herbal medicine a lot, and we know that the supplements and herbal alternative medical industry is not as regulated as the actual active ingredient medication. So it's somewhere where it's difficult to say this is going to work, this isn't going to work. But again, sometimes there's a lot of danger, even with just supplements. If you're taking supplements unsupervised, we are seeing a lot more liver damage and for liver transplants, because dosing. How do you know what is in that preparation? Because it's, again, I'll keep insisting, it's not regulated. If I wanted to create a new supplement, I don't have any governing body that's going to require me to meet the standards as if I make paracetamol tablets.
So what about like vitamins?
Exactly my point. Nobody, in fact, if you came and we went and tested it and we found it was chalk, there's no one to sue.
No one knows, yeah.
No one knows.
It's just as a placebo.
It's not as well regulated. So a lot of it will have placebo effect.
Yeah.
If it's coming from reputable companies, they have standards that they're upholding, but at the same time, how much is too much? How much is normal dose?
Exactly.
Do you actually need this supplement? Are you deficient? So there's always a risk. It's the same as going over the counter for something.
Yeah.
It's the same, because you don't know, do I know that I'm deficient so that I'm taking, or do I believe that because I was told by my friend? And that's word of mouth is the biggest influence here.
And Dr. Google.
Yeah, and Dr. Google. So someone will read, I have period pain, it's really bad. So instead of getting, there's always a concern of getting addicted to painkillers. That's something I hear a lot.
Everybody's talking about it nowadays.
But then you're not concerned about the herbal alternative that you've switched to and whether or not it's safe for you, or the supplements that you've switched to. You have a belief that it's safe, but it's not necessarily true, because we do have people who have full-on liver failure because of some of the preparations that we're taking, and now a liver transplant in Kenya. I don't know how.
Whole story on its own.
All right, let's wrap up.
One more question before we wrap up.
Okay.
So we always hear the cry of doctors, especially saying they're not being paid enough, they're not being paid what they're worth. And when you compare some of the pay that the doctors are getting here with the pay that doctors get abroad, there's a huge difference. So personally, what is your take on that?
It's been a disaster. It's been a disaster, and I feel like we've gone back in time where we're going to start to see a lot of brain drain. That term, I don't know if the audience would understand that, but people will exit and leave us in an even more dire situation, because it's not just that you're not paying doctors enough, you're not paying doctors. There are counties where, and it's not just the doctors, the nurses, the clinical officers, the healthcare providers haven't been paid, and I have this on full authority for 8 months now.
Oh no, what?
Please tell me how you would be functioning as a person, because I'm not going to go to my landlord and say, as a doctor, I haven't been paid, please. 8 months in. It's not going to work. I'm not going to be able to go to the supermarket and say, I'm mini daktari, I'll pay you when I'm finally paid. But that's what's happening, the situation at the moment. So they're not being paid. Forget being paid fairly. So that's the struggle we're having, and it gets to a point where you have to ask yourself tough questions.
All right. You want to throw it?
On a light note, let's do something fun. Let's take you down memory lane. So back in, your teens, your 20s, what was that one song for you that you would constantly play that would just cheer you up, that would get you going, that would relax you?
Your theme song for a productive day. Just listen.
Or just for a sleepy day. A song you just want to play and just fall asleep.
For real.
Tap out.
As a young teenage girl, anything Backstreet Boys.
Boy bands. Backstreet. So I have a bunch over here. As long as you love.
Let's start with that.
That's a dope one.
That's the one.
You're a true millennial.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, your sisters like that as well, huh? Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Amazing.
It's been real. And when is your next episode? Because I really love your podcast. That's actually one of the reasons I decided to holler at you.
Oh, that's fantastic. I have a very special one on Friday, because I had a fantastic interview with now late Dr. Kinuthia, and we are airing it posthumously, and it's on incest in families.
Is that big in Kenya, by the way?
Wow.
Yes.
Incest.
Yes.
It is
Rampant.
huge.
Okay, I'm not talking about the other communities. I don't want to call out any that we've known traditionally. They can marry their cousins.
And I mean,
Typical African Kenyan.
you know how you're picturing lower
Yeah.
income bracket?
Yeah.
Go up.
Nah.
You remember
Is it like a
when
new thing? It's been there.
No, it's been there.
Kenya.
you were talking about keeping it in the family last time, so hey.
It's true. By the way,
Yeah, that was finance.
that was-
Yeah, that was finance.
There are people who went the other way too.
No.
yeah, imagine if you find out you're your uncle's son. Your uncle is your pops. Keep it in the family. Mambo, families thrive because of secrecy. That's what we learned yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Sasa, thank you so much for coming through. That is Dr. Claire Kinuthia. She's a consultant gynecologist, and the other one.
The other one.
That's what.
OBGYN.
Abu, say it again with an accent.
Obstetrician.
Oh, I love it. Obstetrician. I love it. Thank you so much. We've been talking all things empowering youth to make informed sexual and reproductive health decisions. Asante sana for coming through. What's your handle again, by the way, just for somebody who's listening to you for the first time? Maybe they want to just
My
engage
name,
with the content.
so Dr. Claire Kinuthia
Yeah.
on pretty much any social media handle,
Yeah.
or for the podcast, it's CTRH Podcast.
Yeah. Good stuff. Sasa, Backstreet Boys, As Long As You Love Me, coming through in a bit, and then we cruise the internet at 5 minutes after 9. Good evening, Kenya.
SpiceFM, Nyeri, Pure Golden Sound, and